Boa noite, Brasil. Sejam todos.
Brazil, may you always be welcome to the fourth day of the 7th edition of Brazil Conference. For the first time in Brazil, being here from Rio de Janeiro. My name is Hector Guzmão. I'm CEO of the Startup Factory, and we're airing from Rio de Janeiro. We are reaching half of the conference, the midway. We made the opening at the cable car station, and on Sunday, and these past 2 days, we had several interesting panels with relevant people to discuss themes which are of interest to the future of Brazil. If we take a look at all those videos, panels on YouTube, the last days accumulated thousands and thousands of views, and you can share and engage other people to discuss the themes that were addressed these days. The theme of this year is to dialogue in order to transform, and we'll be able to do this by engaging several people and all the themes addressed and other things to be addressed from now until Saturday, which will be our closure of the 7th Brazil Conference 2021. I have a spoiler today. We have a short day. Yesterday we had a long day. We started at 11 a.m. and finished at 11 p.m., 12 hours, but today it is a short day. We have 2 panels, and I'll give you 2 spoilers. Among other, we will have Fabio Barão, which is Director of Infrastructure, Concessions and PDT of BNDES, the Investment Development Bank, and Flávio who's a journalist, and two panels to be we'll have today. I'll tell you a little about today's agenda. Today's agenda includes at 6, right after my opening here, the panel infrastructure and sanitation, sewage disposal. Then after a break, we come back with a fiscal reform, and then we'll have Manceto, who is from BTG Pactual, adding, contributing to this panel on Brazilian fiscal reform. At 8:30, I come back for a quick overview of the day, and then I'll call directly from Boston, one of the co-chairs of Brazil Conference 2021, and he'll have a conversation with me, and we'll announce the agenda for tomorrow. So if you check here to my right above, you can, there's a QR code for you to access all the agenda of every day. So, and yesterday we had a technical problem at the first part of Brazil Conference when we had to edit this video, which will be submitted again. So when you consult the videos on what happened yesterday, only half of the day will be available after, but before that, we'll provide this as soon as possible. So you'll be able to watch every panel we had yesterday and therefore be able to share and have a dialogue so we can transform this country. So let's start the 4th day of Brazil Conference 2021, and I'll call the Infrastructure and Sanitation Sewage Disposal panel, which has a leader, which is Fabien Breton. Fabien, the panel is yours, and may you all have a good conference.
Boa noite a todos.
Good evening. My name is Fabien Breton. I am an MBA student here at the MIT. Welcome to the Infrastructure Panel of Brazil Conference. In this panel, we explore the theme, Infrastructure of Basic Sanitation as a Factor for Reducing Inequality in Brazil, and we count on the presence of Fabio Brown, Director of Infrastructure Concessions and Public-Private Partnership for the BNDES, Carla Barroso. She is a diplomat of career for 26 years. Currently, she is a minister in second class. She works at the Ministry of Regional Development. And we have here, as a moderator of our panel, we have Mr. Edson Carlo, Executive Chair of the Institute Data Brazil. I'd like to wish you all a great panel and pass the floor to my friend Edson. Hello? Shall we? Well, I'd like to thank all of you who are watching us. Thank the organizers of Brazil Conference for this invitation to Institute Data Brazil to moderate such an important panel. We are talking about several matters, several potentialities in Brazil, but as well as much lack. Amongst them, that of basic sanitation, perhaps the most delayed infrastructure we have in Brazil. We have 35 million people who have no access to drinkable water, and 100 million people do not have sewage disposal. It is one of our main problems, and we have a group of panelists who will address the universe of these vulnerable areas where sanitation will really bring a change to quality of life and people, but also Fabio from the BNDES, who bank which is in charge of the modeling for this new model of sanitation, and Carla Barroso with a view, an important view, a national and international view, who will share with us her view. So I'd like to thank all of them and move on to the next question. Ask Gilson the first question. Gilson, at GDS, you have done a great work, and I was congratulating you before we started the panel. Work that is being done, Carla, Fabian. Before I start, I'd like to call attention to a point, something that is taking place in Brazil, which relates to what we call the new normal. And the new normal in this moment means less food. The dish, many people unemployed, and here in Paraisópolis, people are making queues to get food, and at noon the food is over and the queue goes on. So there is a portrait of Brazil. People are, and I like to read the letter of a child, a girl called Yasmin. She says, I live in Paraisópolis, Rua da Mutinga. The house is not big, neither too small. I'm happy with my family. Gilson, can you give us a basket, a food basket? My mother is unemployed and is ashamed of asking. And this is a portrait of a Brazil that in this moment is going through hard times, because those problems, even related to sanitation, to sewage, became evident, and not much was done. I haven't seen any progress in a sense, because we noticed that this is a complex issue in Brazil, as it doesn't yield votes. So thousands of families in Brazil have this problem of lack of sanitation. So, but there are other thousands of people living on top of polluted streams without access to basic sanitation, drinkable water, living in gathered in crowds in small and unhealthy environments, venues. The fact is that progress is not reaching us. At the same time that we notice that this, we cannot say that in Brazil, there are those millions of Brazilians who are being left to their own devices. So there's a Brazil of home office and a Brazil of hunger, Brazil of lack of basic sanitation infrastructure, and we consider that the new normal. So we need to change this reality and create conditions for Brazil to be able to build infrastructure in order to respond to the population that needs most. And our water should be an asset of all. But the fact is that in the Brazilian shanty towns, water is missing, and people say we need to protect ourselves, to use sanitizer and mask when we lack water. There are certain regions here where we lack water. So people need a bucket in order to be able to take a bath. So we need to make ever more evident, but more than that, we need to create infrastructure for, so we can leave the situation. So we can consider this normal. So I don't see any progress being made. It is a sad situation. So we need to create public policies and pressurize in order to solve this problem. Thank you, Gilson. When we made this effort for the new legal framework, the main flag we raised was in the sense of not leaving these areas out of the new legal framework, but because we had legislation from 2007 where that didn't allow us to make much progress. So we don't see much of progress in these areas for several reasons. Lack of money. So I will, first of all, I'd like to apologize with Carla because normally we start with ladies first, but here for a matter of her having this national and international context, we left her to answer last. So she can provide her a broader vision. So I'd like to talk with regarding what Gilson said. The BNDES, the development plan, has been the responsible for the articulation and regarding the new legal framework of sanitation and trying to study the situation of each state in order to suggest to the mayors and governors a way out. So Fabio, what have been the challenges BNDES has found in formulating this modeling as you are in Rio, and we are about to have the auction of the water utility, the tender for water utility, Rio de Janeiro can really serve as a mirror. So tell us about those challenges. Thank you. So good evening, Edson, good evening, Carla, Gilson. Well, I will start. We remember BNDES as financial operations, loans, and so on and so forth. A year and a half ago, we founded what we call a service bank, a bank of services. What is the role of this? A bank of services comes in precisely to structure those projects and make them become reality. So reality means to have the project well done and manage to bring investors to be able to implement them. So that is a role quite different from what the bank has done historically. But in a country like ours, until we reach the moment where the bank is able to come with a typical fostering operation by means of credit, you need to have this opportunity duly structured. And in sanitation is really something important. Our projects, they have an impact on a population of around 55 million people, and this tends to grow. So it is an impact, a gigantic impact. And how does this work? We come to certain states and certain cases of municipalities, we try to provide a scaled solution, and we help the public entities, the government, to identify what has done, how it can be done, and how to obtain the resources. And then there is the tender, the RFP, the request for proposal. And as for sanitation, we normally say that it went through various models, state models, municipality models, several kinds of government. And the fact is that it did not work. The current model in Brazil did not work. So you said it's 100 million Brazilians without treated sewage, which is something medieval. And so on one hand, you have unemployment. On the other hand, you have negative effects over the health of the population, which in the past decades, I never saw a solution actually be implemented. So what are we doing now? There is not a rule of thumb. I would say each situation is different. For example, in Rio de Janeiro, we include in every the urbanized and the non-urbanized area. How we do this in the state capital, we place a goal, obligation of minimum investment into the shanty towns. In the case of Rio, it's something like 2 billion real. In the case of Alagoas, which was the first tender we made, we set a service to be provided for any area with at least 3,000 people. So depending on the situation, we have a solution. And providing one more example, in the case of Rio, we have worked very much in terms of a social tariff. Here in Rio de Janeiro, we have something like 0.5% of population with access. So what is the pillar of this? For this project to be successful, we need to, on one hand, respond to the needs of the poor population, the population as a whole, be it the poor population or middle class population, and the public policy has to be fulfilled as well. And third of all, we need to have economic feasibility throughout time. And this is hard, but possible. But so now we have projects in Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais, Pernambuco, Paraíba, Amapá, Rio Grande do Sul. So it is a scope that encompasses different regions in the country, and we're quite optimistic. It has worked. The first tender was in Alagoas and was successful, and would say that the impact that, which is even more important, is that of creation of jobs, because sanitation or construction work creates jobs. And in Rio de Janeiro, we calculated something like 45,000 direct jobs, more than in other areas, and those are lasting jobs. We're talking about 12 years of works, so it's quite a volume. So in fact, and this helps to pass through this critical moment of pandemic. So that is how we see it. We see the response to the user.
Aí a gente teve espectro aí do Gilson, né, de uma pessoa que convive com isso, que acompanha o dia a dia, que sente na pele se a água está chegando mais ou está chegando menos. Teve essa visão do Fábio, de alguém que está olhando, que tem o desafio de incluir
They're
isso.
watching and have the challenge of including this, including the new framework to transform a law that is something on a paper, something concrete. That's the difficulty. We have to include the population in a public policy that is compulsive. The operator is in charge of the city now. How can I say this lump? I won't consider it. No, it's compulsory. 99% of the people have to have access to water. So it's very good. I'm very happy to have Carla with us, because I don't know how many sanitation events we've held, and it's very difficult to find someone from the diplomacy, someone connected to Itamaraty or to the ministry with a seat in the Itamaraty. So I'm very happy to have you here, Carla. I would like to ask you, you that have such a great international, national experience, that you've lived with policies from other countries, how do you see this in considering Brazilian context comparing to other countries? Can you notice differences? No doubt that this government is trying to find a solution to basic sanitation. How do you see this moment of in sanitation compared to the great experience that you have abroad also? Thank you. Well, I would like to thank you very much, Carlos, and I thank my co-participants here in this panel, who I am sure I'm going to learn a lot with all of you. I thank also for the opportunity to organizers to talk about such an important issue to the population in Brazil. I would like to start saying to Gilles that even we compare with an international point of view, and we're trying to build a public policy in order to try bring participation from abroad. We always think about this girl with the letter of this tweet that was mentioned. She is the objective we have when we're here trying to find a public policy to improve the life of people. Well, I would like to tell you the first thing that is important to consider when we have a comparison with other countries is something that people don't talk about. Sanitation is not something single, it's unique. When we talk about sanitation in Brazil, we're talking about 4 great activities: this water supply, sewage, solid residue treatment, and urban drainage. This is a concept with this comprehensiveness only exists like this in Brazil. So it's good to consider this when we talk about a comparison with other countries, that we can be comparing pears and apples. So we have to be careful with this. Having said this, you're correct in saying that the international situation regarding sanitation is very different or more different, than the one that exists in Brazil, where we also have very different situations. Unfortunately, we still have a lot to obtain, and that is what the government is trying to do, to universalize the access until 2033. But I would like to tell you also that part of this difference, you have a basic challenge that is common. The social infrastructures are dynamic. Why? Because they try to help and give to the population to their needs. The population changes in time and space. They change, same family changes in a biological cycle of life. So the public assets that they demand from the state, they change during this process. So even those countries that have access to sanitation and more advanced ones, they still face a lot of challenges. For example, I would tell you that in Holland, they have a very interesting experimental program to try to generate energy or recover cellulose from the sewage. That is a very interesting project that shows how everybody's trying to find an improvement and improve the access of population to those social infrastructures. It is a permanent challenge. Another thing that has to be considered also is the structure of the state. We in Brazil, we have a very complex structure with local duties and obligations and all the levels, and that's a great challenge. But we also have some models in the world that are similar to ours that were inclusive use when we added the best international practices that ended in the new sanitation framework. And it's very modern and unlike what exists in the world in this area. We have France, for example, that decentralizes the services in this area. They are very decentralized. France is a developed country, but they have a very different model from Portugal and very different also from Spain. So I would say, to repeat something that's very well known, but it's worthwhile to say here, there's not a single unique solution. We have to look at our girls from this street that was mentioned, see how we can help them. And I trust that the government is trying really, and they will be able to advance to this until 2033. Thank you, Carla. Very good. Excellent to have this vision of who knows the system, because it's very common in debates about sanitation. People opposite to the movement that Brazil has adopted with this framework. We always draw the attention to what is being proposed in other countries and comparing other countries. But as you said, it's much deeper. The analysis has to be more detailed because these countries have this infrastructure for much longer time than Brazil when they started this movement for sanitation decades ago. So it's important to compare oranges with oranges and not bananas and apples. But I would like to also take advantage of Gilson. Gilson, I want to blend two questions in one. We execute projects in very vulnerable areas also. We will see what is happening. We talk about with the community leaders, and we try to help for the sewage and water companies start with their services. We talk with the public attorneys also that have some legal impediments to start with their work because there's some kind of judicial barriers for this. But we also find many places where people don't even know that they have the right to this infrastructure. The level of neediness is so great. When we tell the person that they have a right to have water or sanitation, they don't even know this. Is that correct? Do you agree with this? That people should also learn how to demand the services of infrastructure. That was something that was hidden from everybody in the past. Do you think this is changing? We had some classical examples from a Rocinha slum. We had a political movement of some years ago of installing a kind of a train there. And there was a group that was against putting this kind of train, and people didn't have even water to drink. So our vision in Brazil is changing. Do you think that this is changing also in the understanding of people that live in these places, that this is a right that they have to demand this? Well, I have the idea that we all know our right to water and to everything we need in order to grow and develop. 85% of the people that come from the slums come from the Northeast. Most of them came from the Northeast with a dream of transforming their lives and giving education to their children and become rich. No one went to live in the slums because they wanted. They came to these regions, to the capitals, and they ended up in the slum. We talk about being proud of living in a favela or in a slum. It's because we notice that we're living to Brazil. One, that you have a home office, you remain at home, you have access to everything. And another Brazil that for years is living on a creek, no water, and with hunger. That's the picture of Brazil today, and we consider this a new normal. I have an idea that so much is lacking that perhaps people are accustomed, like the smell we feel, and you feel a very strong smell. The people that live there are accustomed to the smell. They're accustomed to it. So this is a fact of many people that live in the slums in the whole country. So when we lack food and we don't have adequate home and sanitation and water, it seems luxury when we get it. Although we have this understanding of the requirement that we have, we are trying to find solutions, and we've been optimistic. We haven't thought, in the absence of public policy regarding the slums before the pandemic, we started to create our own policy, and the organization model is a movement where we have homeless that is trying to help. So this Favelas do Brasil in 14 states, a model that we're having here. Now we have 8,000 presidents in the streets. We're mobilizing gigantically everybody. And we think that this group, where we have 50 families, one president, one leadership, it becomes, as of now, a chain of mobilization. And we want to improve the street. We want to have education and water supply. So the greatest legacy is the organization of the community, help the locals and make them leaders, take care of their families, and for them to mobilize in the common benefit to help the slums to prosper. We, for example, during the pandemics, we have mitigation against COVID-19. We hired ambulance, we have furnished masks, and also we helped with food. Added to the sanitary crisis, we have economical crisis. We have a lot of initiatives to help people. The best way to fight inequality is to put money in the water. So we want to be a greatest chain of help to the south. We have logistics, it's Brazil Favela Express, and we try to help to distribute food with the Cesta Básica. We're creating a number of programs and very, very optimistic, and giving an example for society to be able to consider a place where people were needy. Now they can see a will, organization, management. And our management here is better than the city of São Paulo. Rate of contamination of the virus is lower. So we need public policies. And Paraisópolis now is going to complete 100 years. In 100 years, no government was able to give advances. We had some advances in some governments, for example, Elizabeth França and Vera Diniz, they were leading this. We had some advances, but we had a great program for urbanization in Brazil. Many slums in Brazil were able to take this as an example, but they were programs that are very specific. And when the government changes, they don't consider a priority anymore. So we have to have an effective public policy that apart from the government is in power, things will continue. We have to have resources for this. We noticed that after 1 year of the pandemics, the creeks are there, we don't have water, and a lot of things are lacking. And what has been done up to now? Very little. We have to create and pressure. Our situation is very complicated because when we request things, they don't give us any importance. So we had to come to Paraisópolis with a lawsuit to ensure water supply. We have a lawsuit requesting water supply, and until now, there's no solution. So we are exposed to this, and in practice, we have movements, but they don't reach all these campaigns for food. For example, nothing is reaching the governors because the situation is very, very strict and severe. Yes, you're right. For a long time, we created government policies. We don't have state policies. We are every 4 years, we have to have a fight in order to see if things continue in force or effective or not. But in this spirit that you mentioned, I want to ask Fabio. Fabio, we have a great fear, mainly for these people that live in vulnerable areas, that the new sanitation movement will mean an increase in the price of this. And Gilles is a witness of this, of the difficulty that people have today to pay any kind of bill, even considering the increase in the supply of water or sanitation. This legal framework, we are able that with this change of the scenario of sanitation, new companies starting to work in this, that these people will suffer an increase in their bills. The whole city, and especially these people that live in the slums. BNDES is quite concerned and not linking these models to an increase in the bills. Of course, all the bills have to increase because of inflation and so on, but those abusive increases, is that correct? Is the bank sensitive to the moments that Brazil is going through in the future of sanitation that you're considering? Without no doubt, I've commented this previously. In the case of SEDAV, we've seen things increasing about 10 times. It's a central concern of ours because sanitation to become democratic, two things happen. One, I think it's very important what she also said. The citizen that lives in a slum is a citizen. That is, he is not disabled. On the opposite, he understands he has to have responsibility and he has to have opportunities. All opportunity demands responsibility. So the calculation that we do is always considered. There's some rich areas in the city that can make feasible the expansion towards the poor sites. There's some regions in cities or capitals that are able to pay more. So this makes feasible the supply to the countryside. So I believe that everybody is considered a consumer and they have a legitimate need for the service. And what is given, nothing is given. There's always a cost. So that's a concern of including this in a system that will work. But once the system works and it's stable, that means it won't be interrupted. It's no use to have a wonderful work and then there's no water. So we have to think about sustainability. So in general, we consider the capacity of payment, the relation of the consumer, that is, he will pay very little, a social fee. The consumer has the rights. He could go to the company and demand his rights because he's a consumer. He doesn't receive it as a favor. And I would add something else. Sanitation today probably is a sector that has the more capacity of generating jobs in Brazil. There's a enormous number of works great deficit that has been for centuries. Our cities, when we think about it, it's more than 100 years. Paraisópolis, and this slum he mentioned, and in Rio de Janeiro also we have very ancient slums. And here in Rio de Janeiro, everybody drinks water with a bad smell, a bad taste, and who can buy mineral water? Those who can't buy mineral water have to drink this dirty water. So we see an opportunity of job generation, and not a 1-year job, but a long time job. So we see this as an opportunity of bringing this to a citizenship. People that are excluded because they become consumers. They pay very little, but they become consumers. They have the capacity of demanding. So it's a stronger process. And obviously, the positive impacts that having sanitation in a specific area. I mean, we could have to think about diseases and environmental impact in the rivers and in the beaches. So this criteria of having environmental recovery on one side, citizenship and job generation and income generation, we see as a direct result of everything that we're doing. So I'm very optimistic. It's not something that these interventions take time, they're long. I won't tell you that in 6 months we will solve this. Something that's in 500 years old here, these problems, and this will take a long time to be solved, but it will generate an impact since the very beginning. Long time and stable impacts. And we think we have to focus in this. I'm very optimistic, having very good results, and we're here to transform and help the country to reach this. Great. I spoke this because I participated all these years in the process in Brasilia, and that ended with law. And we had this concern and this doubt that this movement was considering a high price, and we've been a witness of the difficulty that BNDES had to fit this low tariffs for population, and they almost prohibited the increase in the tariff. So something concrete. So Carla, we speak a lot that the most across under infrastructure in Brazil is sanitation, because it reduces the cost of health. The children that have best health are doing better at school. We have studies that prove this, that people that live in places where the sanitation situation is very difficult, very bad, they have lower grades at school. So there are a lot of consequences. The sanitation improves tourism. So do you also think that when Brazil compares itself with the world, the evolution of sanitation can also be a window to this new country that we want to build in terms of human development, compliance of the ODS? We have international indexes that rank the countries, and basic sanitation is at the root of many of the national needs. And when it is solved, it can take Brazil to another level in the world. Do you agree with this? Or am I just dreaming a bit as I am in love with sanitation? No, I don't think you're dreaming. On the contrary, I think that these targets are strategic in the path of growth for our country. So just to give you some numbers, R$1 invested in sanitation are the numbers of the WHC. So R$1 invested in sanitation means R$4 less in expenses with health. 1 billion of reais spent in works generates 60,000 jobs. These jobs, as Fabio mentioned very well, have a trend to maintain themselves for a long time, because it's not a work that has a short cycle. On the opposite, it's work that will have long cycles. And we have another things that we could show you, that investment in sanitation has a cross effect, and the IDH has main elements of its composition: health, education, and income. And these are exactly these elements that you mentioned. So if you have better sanitation, you have better indexes in health, you have more access to people, have to jobs and schools, and you generate income because it generates jobs, high number. And I wouldn't say relation between sanitation and immediate improvement in DHI. But there is a correlation in this, and this is exactly one of the main reasons to try and bring foreign funding to act in this area. I think we're going to talk about this further on. Good. Well, Gilson, we from Trata Brasil, our concern that we had was to try and check which were the problems that didn't allow sanitation to reach these areas, because we had the understanding that it was a bad will of someone that wasn't very keen on this and excluding these areas. But these areas have a lot of people living there. Also, in the point of view of votes, it makes sense to do something there because many people. So thinking about political point of view, it makes sense to take services to these areas. So we talk with the public attorney, with the departments and courts, and we've seen that in some places, in fact, there's some problems, hindrances, or lack of dialogue, not with you, with the organization of the communities, but among the government, because one department doesn't speak to the other department in the government. So we always have barriers that end and not allowing the service to reach the places, being economical or legal barriers. Has this changed? You're very articulated, very well contacted. And these contacts that you have with government, do you think these things are changing, or these are excuses in order to face the real problem of urbanizing these areas and take this, which is the feeling that you're
O nosso sentimento é de que não é só uma percepção, é uma política de exclusão, onde as favelas têm crescido de maneira desordenada em cima de áreas de
I would
mananciais.
say that it is a policy of exclusion. The shantytowns have grown in a disorganized manner on top of polluted streams without any process of integration. It is hard to make programs of social transformation, integrating every secretariat of government, and there are political disputes in the sense of who is in charge of these communities. The population has demanded this. Before, perhaps the population would not mention the topic very much, but we're trying to ever more integrate this, because we noticed what Carla mentioned, how much this represents in terms of investment, of health or diseases to be avoided, dengue fever and many others. If there was an investment, the money would have been saved with health treatment. It is a matter of health, and many people are not having much access to water, sanitation, and other things. We cannot manage to follow here the recommendations of the World Health Organization. So the powers end up fighting among themselves for things not to be done, not for things to be done. And at the same time, in general, the sewage works or sometimes related to removal of communities. So people are afraid of being removed in the sense of displacing people. So as we manage to open for dialogue, things might change, because many people who have a technical background are not ready to listen to the community. The community wants to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And many times there is a standardized project with no dialogue whatsoever, which has to be taken by that community. But we want participation. We want the best. We want the best for us. As someone already said, well, 50 real, we don't want to have two Brazils, one Brazil of the rich neighborhoods and the Brazil of the shantytown. We want to prosper as well. We want to develop as well. That is what we have been looking for. And we want to see a shantytown as a place with the power of transformation. So that is why we created the block. Instead of Paraisópolis, Heliópolis, or Rocinha, those center towns, those slums, working separately, we need to gather and to work as a group in order to talk with the authorities. So I was recently with the vice mayor of São Paulo, and then I met the mayor of Recife and the mayor of São Luís. We are meeting mayors of capital cities in order to find solutions. We want to be part of the solution and not of the problem. We're not concerned in terms of finding the guilty parties, but we are involved in creating solutions to solve the problem as a whole. So the problems that were made evident by the pandemic. So we need to have integration between different spheres of government, but there are good solutions, but we are still lacking political will. The community wants it, but wants this to be integrated within a broad infrastructure program. And so we are at this moment looking for this integration and promoting dialogue.
Essa estratégia de você
Very interesting. So that strategy is a strategy that we have been addressing since the beginning. We haven't come here to blame those who did not do it, but an important thing is we need to point out the ones in charge. So we need to know to whom the responsibility belongs to, so I can address these people. So, and the requests of articulations in order to move forward, but there are things where no progress is made. Fabio, we are heading towards the end, and I'll pass the floor again to Gilson. I thank you all. I thank all the panelists. Well, and something that good that the legal framework brought was the inclusion of the small municipalities. We have vulnerable municipalities which are very small, which were always left aside of the sanitation policies that perhaps were linked to a public or private company, but they were somehow left abandoned. So do you still see here a great opportunity for the small and vulnerable municipalities, which will now be included in the federal policy? Yes, there is opportunity because several of them wouldn't have a skill to attract investment to their populations. So the framework created a means to make feasible the competition for companies to render the service. But this much remains in the hands of municipality is something of a constitution. The decision belongs to the municipalities. So the framework would be in the sense of the municipalities getting organized along with the state and make a coalition and be able to join a process for widening the service. On the other hand, I agree with your comments. It is important to expose. Debate is essential. Let's see two cases. The state of Amapá, for example. Both the state government as well as a new city administration are working in terms of there being a bidding process there in different municipalities. Our idea is to have this in the beginning of the second semester. So it is a positive example. On the other hand, we have the state of Acre. It is a state which had a project ready with 2 years of work. But we saw a gap that the city hall, the municipality of Rio Branco, decided to do this work with state investment. But then it is the capital city in that state which makes it possible for other areas to be included. So there is a gap. So even though the regulatory framework provided a solution, on the other hand, there is an effort of trying to unify public policies, common views in order to respond to the needs of the population.
A população, enfim, faça parte aí desse debate.
And this is essential for the population to take part in the debate. So I'd like to say goodbye. I'd like to thank for the opportunity. This is a debate. When you look at infrastructure in Brazil, it is the most important debate, given all the benefit that it might bring and the great creation of jobs. So it solves a historical problem of our environment. It tackles this problem. It helps to solve the problem of employment and also health. It is inclusive. It is the most inclusive infrastructure process we can see. But so I am optimistic. The bank is available. Projects involve something like 55 million people, and we are willing to do our part. Thank you very much, Fabio, for the work you have been doing. So now I'd like to pass the floor to Katia, so her final remarks. How is this effort the government has made to bring new resources to Brazil? I know you're working this sense of bringing new resources, new funding sources. And thank you very much, Carla, and I was glad to have you here on our panel. Well, so I'd like to say that as we have discussed, sanitation is now reaching the market 20 years after when the logistics structure came, where there is already a regulatory structure that has already been tested of concessions, of utilities, airports, and energy. So sanitation is only arriving now, now, and it has a huge challenge, which requires hundreds of billions in order to be able to bridge this gap. And and the government is aware of it and is making every effort to solve it. In order to do this, at the Ministry of Regional Development, where we made did research in order to understand how we could create an environment that could be attractive for direct foreign investment. And we came to the conclusion that the government must work here as an organizer of all this international move towards ESG, environmental, social, and finance, but every other complementary requirement that exists regarding investment that is migrating evermore. It was a reputational aspect and that of image, and it has becoming something statutory. So now the largest amount of the biggest institutional investors in the world, the pension funds, the sovereign funds, they have it is mandatory for them to have a share of their investment in ESG projects. So it was before a matter of image. Now it is becoming something mandatory. Now it is becoming clear that those projects that are already aligned with the international criteria, ESG, PRI, blended finance, those projects have less risk, therefore more attractive. So that is the moment, and we will launch in May along with the BNDES and several other players, and even from the financial market. And something else that should be mentioned is this: it is common to have someone who's a utility who signs a contract and then tries to look for funding from banks. And why not work with what is best in, which is blended finance? So if we have a utility holder who signed a contract which already had a project aligned with ESG, the cost for it to issue a green bond is smaller. And we had 2 great emissions in the last year of companies in the area of sanitation, which managed to have low costs. So it is a virtuous cycle when we decide to incorporate to every project the elements to ESG, PRI. So we have CPI as well, so UNDP as well, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank. So we have an ecosystem of partners, banks like BRD, the Bank of Development of Rio Grande do Sul, which are going to help in this part of capacity building, because today there was an research saying that many people mention ESG, but not many people know how to align their project to ESG. So we should train the agents of the private sector so they can work aligning projects to ESG requirements. So I'd like to say goodbye and wish you all great debates and panels. Thank you very much, Carla. That was very interesting, because really there is no actual environmental gain better than for a country than sanitation, than sewage disposal and treatment. So when the concept of ESG arrived in Brazil, companies, it took time, long for companies to understand, but now these mechanisms are being mentioned all the time, because it is an impressive environmental gain as well as social and economic. And I think this will have adherence, and congratulations to the Brazilian government for their work in that sense. We're talking about something like 700 million real. These things will have to appear. I'd like to talk with Gilson. Gilson, you have the final words. It is an honor to have you here, and congratulations for your work. I think the situation is not more chaotic because of movements like the ones you are led by you. So it is good to have people like you. I'd like to know your final remarks, please. So thank you very much. Thank you, Hector, Fabio, Carla. I think the final message is that, in the sense that all of us who are here, this is an international event which is taking place in Brazil, actually, discussing Brazil, and we cannot allow to have two Brazils, divisive Brazil, a Brazil that believes in this so-called new normal, and then the lack of water is something normal. So we need to unite, and we need to give the example so that it is possible. We have created programs to support for training, so we cannot wait for chaos. So, as for sanitation, we need to create some kind of incentive that should be specific to contemplate the slum. This is important to have something to be applied. And also provoke Fabio, because we think that the economic situation, it tends to get worse, but the shantytown wants to be part of the solution. Only so this helps us to strengthen and to prosper, so things are made possible. And all of you who are listening, who want to think about sanitation problems, about urbanization problems, please look for us. We need people to discuss, dialogue, and make things happen. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm there. And let's work, because we need good people working. Thank you very much, Gilson. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Brazil Conference. Thank you, all of you. It was a pleasure to discuss. Sanitation is such an important event. And please be safe, protect yourselves, sanitize your hands, do as much as you can to isolate, because we need to defeat this virus. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Um impulso muda tudo. Muda o todo, muda o mundo. Um impulso e seu negócio já não está mais no mesmo lugar. E aqui, todo mundo, startup e grande corporação, vai concordar. O cenário de inovação é um cenário de incertezas. E faz sentido que seja assim. Se é inovação, é porque ainda não foi feito. Na FabStart, acreditamos num futuro em que startups e corporações aqui no Brasil se tornarão benchmarks de inovação para o mundo. E a FabStart, protagonista dessa transformação. Já deu para imaginar o que esse impulso pode fazer por você? FabStart, desafio aceito. Comece agora. Um impulso muda tudo. Muda o todo, muda o mundo. Um impulso e seu negócio já não está mais no mesmo lugar. E aqui, todo mundo, startup e grande corporação, vai concordar. O cenário de inovação é um cenário de incertezas. E faz sentido que seja assim. Se é inovação, é porque ainda não foi feito. Na FabStart, acreditamos num futuro em que startups e corporações aqui no Brasil se tornarão benchmarks de inovação para o mundo. E a FabStart, protagonista dessa transformação. Já deu para imaginar o que esse impulso pode fazer por você? FabStart, desafio aceito. Comece agora. Um impulso muda tudo. Muda o todo, muda o mundo. Um impulso e seu negócio já não está mais no mesmo lugar. E aqui, todo mundo, startup e grande corporação, vai concordar. O cenário de inovação é um cenário de incertezas. E faz sentido que seja assim. Se é inovação, é porque ainda não foi feito. Na FabStart, acreditamos num futuro em que startups e corporações aqui no Brasil se tornarão benchmarks de inovação para o mundo. E a FabStart, protagonista dessa transformação. Já deu para imaginar o que esse impulso pode fazer por você? FabStart, desafio aceito. Comece agora.
Muito boa noite a todos. É um enorme prazer abrir mais
Good
painel.
evening to all of you. It's a great pleasure to open one more panel in Brazil conference this year. This panel, fiscal reform and social programs. It's very important, extremely important for the current moment that we're going through in Brazil. It's no news that Brazil is in a fiscal crisis never seen before and accentuated by the pandemics. the public debt is fearing, and if nothing is done, it can overcome 100% of the GDP in the next years. Reforms are very necessary, but it is important that they are proposed considering the Brazilian context and the inequality where social programs are essential to ensure the minimum for a great amount of the population of our country. To mediate this important discussion, I will call to the floor the journalist of Globo News, Monica Waldboger, that accepted our invitation. Before anything, I would like to appreciate very much Brazil Conference for the trust. It's a great invitation to talk about such an important subject with people that I admire so much and I follow so much for a long time. We're going to talk about fiscal reform and social policies. Mansueto Almeida, who is a very expert economist in public finances and that was former Secretary of the National Treasury. Ricardo Paz de Bra, who's an economist and engineer, also an expert and researcher of social policies and studies about inequality, poverty, and education. Flávio Oliveira, my dear colleague of all the debates, and the journalist, students of Globo News, and Helena Landau, that we've followed so long since her participation in the public life and the programs of desensitization in the government of Fernando Henrique as an economist, and lawyer, and now a leader of free parties in the liberal social approach. We have a lot to talk about here, mainly because we're going through a set of issue of fiscal problems in Brazil. We've seen what happened with the budget, something never seen before. We had never thought to reach April with a budget approved, but not sanctioned because it's not feasible. We had cuts in the compulsory expenses and has been an excess of amendments, and no one knows now how to solve politically all this confusion. That's why I will ask the first question to Mansueto. He understands very well and ask, which is the size of this great problem, Mansueto, that we're going through now at the moment? Well, the size of the fiscal problem in Brazil, 400 billions of reais. We will have to, in the next 4 or 5 years, to have a superávit in 2026, a fiscal adjustment in about 400 billions of reais. This in GDP is 5 points of the GDP, percentage of GDP that we have to keep in 5 years to reach to a primary result in 2026 that will at least stabilize the debt, public debt, net and gross public debt in Brazil. That's the most short time problems. Repeating, we have in 5 years to have a fiscal adjustment that had to be done in 10 years. If we don't do this fiscal adjustment, the debt will continue growing, and the interest can increase. In the shorter term, that is this year, which is a problem, we've approved in 2016 a rule called the roof of the expense. That means the expenses of the government can only grow according to the inflation. The inflation that corrects the roof of the expenses is approved until June, because the budget is done in June, July, and August. The inflation last year was 2%. That means that the space for the growth of the expenses here is only 30 billion reais, and not fits all the growth of the compulsory expenses and demands of the congressman for investments and money to execute investments in the regions. So we have a problem, which is a problem to have all the demand with a parliament amendments and the growth of the social security expenses and emergency funding and everything. It's under the 30 billion reais, the growth for this year. What did the Congress do? The Congress didn't cut a lot. They underestimated the complying expenses moment in the year the government will necessarily have to pay. So the budget that was approved has a problem. If it is executed the way it left the Congress, the parliament amendments in amount much over the budget, the government will have to cut the budget that is not compulsory for many ministries. That's impossible. The cut has to be very huge. We're talking about a cut of 30 and 40 billions of reais on the expense that is discretionary, that is not compulsory, that would go about to 50, 60 billions, and it's very little for the government to function. And if the government cuts the budget amendments, they will have a political problem because the Congress is saying these amendments we put in the budget, these amendments at the table and chat and come to a middle term. The political dialogue has to happen. The budget, by definition, is a political piece. It's where we have the wish of the society and where we try to reach a middle term, the wishes of society on how to find what to do with everything that's collected in the country at the end of the year. If the demand is much more than the money that is available, we have to show the pros and cons. And so we reach this point because of a lack of communication, possibly a problem of communication between the government and the Congress. This has to be corrected, as you mentioned, very urgently, because if not, we will have a budget that is feasible of execution. This is a problem, very severe, but we have to solve it. And two parties have to. I ask you, up to what point didn't we lose in the execution of this budget? Something that has been tried very difficultly in influence of the groups of society in the allocation of the resources. Apparently, the society doesn't have any participation in the budget. Only congressmen and the ministries that want to spend in an election year. Do you agree? Yes, I do. Monica, good evening. Good evening to all of you, Mansueto, Eliana Deer, and everybody that is watching us. And I think perfect, Monica, your approach, and also very linked to what Mansueto was talking about, the budget being a political piece and in thesis it will comply in the priorities of society. So I think that it's so recent, so new, this wish that has never been accomplished, that this debate that we're having here now in Brazil conference is not common. I, a journalist and activist connected to economy and social indicators, participating as in a debate in a panel about fiscal reform and about budget. This is not seen in Brazilian society talking about budget and this fiscal debate. It's a monopoly of the economists dedicated to the fiscal area. And even among the economists, a set of group of economists is a very closed group, and it complies above all to spreadsheets showing the requirement to come to numbers and group interests of specific groups that have more condition to make their wishes come true, then effectively comply to the society itself. So I must mention, for example, in the budget of this year, the money, the resources that were foreseen for the census, that is a research of a great importance for society. Part of all this, and also the distribution of the budget incomes, it was entirely eliminated in benefit of a greater budget for the defense ministry. And I think this is an example that is very important of what involves and what has been more important in the Brazilian budget. The current government, Bolsonaro government, has as a trait the not allowing the debate with civil society. This is not my opinion. We have noted during these 2 years and a half decrease or dehydration of the representation of civil society in the dialogue channels with the government. It happened with the environment, it happened with education, it happened with health, and it is continuing happening. Some agreements that seem very consolidated in the Brazilian society disappear, even triple list for the public attorney or to deans of the universities. So we have a very huge difficulty of presenting or impose some kind of measure or ensure the budget in the agenda that are really very necessary for Brazilian society. And I will mention health, not only because we are going through a pandemic, but also because since 2014, at least, I've been researching the researches and the coverages and the consultation before the elections, and the health is at the top of all the Brazilian priorities. I know that we need also to qualify the quality of the expenses, the destination, the efficiency of the expenses, but we also must consider that many parts of the society in Brazil, of the civil Brazilian society, have not been enabled to talk about the budget. This is at the federal level, but also in other dimensions of the federation. How the states expand their resources, how the city halls spend their resources. There's very little interaction, possibility of participation. And I will end my first comments in our chat asking who does this budget represent and to whom does it comply to? I think it is a budget that, in spite of the technical issues that Mansueto explained so well regarding the unbalance, it's not aligned with the most urgent interest of Brazilian society, that is the expenses for social policies, health and education and social assistance. I think this brings us to a discussion of a kind of a dream of utopia, because in fact, it would be possible to have a budget that could be decentralized with zero base, that every year, great economists used to defend this, even they would be allocating the resources according to the plans and the requirements in the projects. But what we have seen, in fact, is a political economy that the capture is much more efficient and brief than the participation in the debate of the society in the budget. So do we have the possibility of restarting the way of having a budget and having a more democratic way, or is it better to ensure more links in order for this capture not to deviate from important issues of the society? Monica, good evening to all. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, with my great friend Mansueto, my colleague from IPEA, and with Flavia and Helena. I think the great problem that we have is exactly that it seems to be a problem to have a lack of money. However, I've spoken many times with Helena, and the great problem of a society is when we don't have ideas. It's good for a society not to have money. It's okay. Imagine a very rich society in ideas and projects with fantastic returns. This society won't have money because there won't be so much money to have all the investment you have to do. And that's what happens. The whole world will want to invest in Brazil because Brazil has great opportunities for investment. The great issue here is that we're spending a lot without having any kind of project, without spending correctly, and the social year is the greatest example for this. when we spend $1.5 trillion or more in social area, and we don't have a clear project of how this $1.5 trillion will in fact reduce in Brazil and will struggle against the poverty in Brazil. We're having a blind social policy. The social policy is similar to the compliance to helping. If you're not who is sick, you can have health.
Você não consegue fazer política social. Se você não souber o que o pobre...
If you don't know what the poor needs, then you can't have social policy the same way that each patient needs differentiated care. So the social policy is necessarily customized. I need to be able to know those who are poor. I need to be able to know what is the need of each poor community, and I need to be able to contact them and provide the care they need. It is just like in health. The doctor needs to know his patients. He needs to provide care to know what his problem is, and then he will design a specific solution, and he needs to be capable to deliver this care. So the same is applies to social policies. If Brazil has a social policy that it can be expensive, but able to solve the problem of poverty and inequality, it makes every sense for Brazil to take a loan in order to make this big investment in the eradication of poverty and the reduction of inequality. But this requires a project demonstrating that this can be done. So, but with a public expenditure indexed with things we ignore whether they will work or not, I am basically spending a fortune and in a blind manner, and to have that, which means to have a blind social policy. Flavia said there is no social policy without support. It is the municipality in the end who carries out social policy and society, which have the capillarity to know who are those who need most and what they need. So I need to have social policy through the eyes of the civil society and the local governments, and with many times with federal budget and a program design that might be federal, but it has to stop being blind policy and has to be an unpegged policy and with a local basis, with an interaction and addressing seriously the problem. Now I pass the floor to Helena, because with her broad experience in political economy and this debate, what do you think? Do you think there is this possible conciliation between the fiscal needs, the tax needs, and the social needs in order to have more effective policies? Is this actually taking place somewhere? Well, good evening. It is a pleasure to be here with my friends. Well, Monica, you asked a question which is difficult to answer. Well, first of all, I think that we are lacking adults in the room, like Mansueto had said. I think Ricardo, Mansueto, and me, we had the privilege to work for governments where there was a project, where there was a leadership, where you were able to know what the destiny was. Brazil is without a destiny. So we don't know what the project is. It's a blind flight. It is the first time I'm in a panel with Mansueto and I feel him pessimistic. We are lacking a course. And we are lacking this anchor. So it shows that how serious the problem is. We are lacking adults in the room. It is not only a matter of communication, but of having an organization, a responsibility from the Ministry of Economy. The Paulo Guedes managed to join two ministries, the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Finance, but they seem to be quite lost. So what I find serious is that we need to have a diagnosis in the sense of that, well, with the Constitution of 1982, we increased the tax burden in order to include social investment. But if we look, it is not only social democracy that widened expenditures. There were corporate interests as well. And now we see that precisely due to lack of leadership, the Congress women are representatives increasing expenditures and with fiscal rules which are impossible to understand. There was a debate last year whether we should spend more or less in the pandemic. No one considers seriously in what way the fiscal rules prevented net investment. Let's separate exactly what the fiscal rule looks for, stability in terms of normality. It has room for expenditures in times of abnormality when things are not normal. So people many times want to copy what worked out. We were in a debate together, and André Portela, another expert in the social area, began to discuss Libes looked for Fernando Veloso
Bom, desculpe a interrupção, houve um problema aqui de internet, mas a gente está voltando. Justamente quando caiu a transmissão, eu ia perguntar para o Mansueto sobre aquele tamanho gigantesco, astronômico, na verdade, para a nossa realidade, de ajuste fiscal que ele disse que o Brasil tem de fazer nos próximos anos. Então, volto para você, Mansueto, perguntando como e onde cabe esse ajuste.
Vamos lá. Então, repetindo o número, esse ano, o buraco fiscal programado para o Brasil, receita menos despesa, sem incluir o pagamento de juros, é um buraco de 247 bilhões de reais, que é 3% do PIB. A gente tem que transformar esse buraco de 247 bilhões em um superávit, em um número positivo de mais ou menos a mesma magnitude, um pouco menos, ou seja, um número positivo de 200 a 250 bilhões de reais. Por isso que o ajuste, a depender da conta que se faz, é, na verdade, maior do que 400 bilhões. É algo aí entre 440 a 500 bilhões de reais. Como fazer isso? Antes, em 2016, foi aprovada essa regra que é o teto de gasto. Quero fazer esse ajuste muito gradualmente. À medida que a economia fosse crescendo, naturalmente a despesa só sendo corrigida apenas pela inflação, a despesa sobre o tamanho da economia, sobre o que produz a economia ao longo do ano, que a gente chama PIB, a despesa sobre o PIB ia gradualmente caindo e num período de 10 anos se fazia esse ajuste fiscal. Agora eu tenho uma má notícia. Mesmo seguindo essa regra, mesmo cumprindo o teto de gasto até 2026, quando o teto completa 10 anos, essa regra não será suficiente para entregar o ajuste fiscal que o país precisa fazer, o que significa que a gente vai precisar olhar para o lado da arrecadação. Olhar para o lado da arrecadação é para todo mundo se assustar mesmo, porque no Brasil a gente tem uma carga tributária alta para o nosso nível de renda. Se o Brasil fosse a Alemanha, a nossa carga tributária não era problema. O Brasil não é a Alemanha. O Brasil é um país de renda média, e para um país de renda média alta, a nossa carga tributária é muito elevada. E aí tem um problema. Quando eu falo que a gente vai precisar da contribuição da arrecadação, parte da arrecadação a gente vai recuperar quando voltar a crescer. Porque no ano passado, quando a economia teve uma queda de 4%, o Brasil perdeu 80 bilhões de reais de arrecadação. A gente vai precisar recuperar isso, mas vai precisar recuperar o que perdeu no ano passado e pelo menos mais 80, 100 bilhões de reais. Como é que a gente consegue mais 80, 100 bilhões de reais, além de recuperar o que a gente perdeu no ano passado? Por exemplo, Mônica, mexendo no que a gente chama benefícios tributários. O Brasil criou uma série de regimes especiais de tributação que favorece as pessoas de classe alta e de classe média. E a gente vai ter que mexer nisso. Vou dar um exemplo, diversos exemplos. E a forma da gente mudar isso é as pessoas no governo explicarem para a sociedade essas anomalias para se criar o consenso político para a mudança. Vou dar um exemplo. No Brasil, quando você completa 65 anos de idade e você é aposentado, a sua faixa de isenção de imposto de renda automaticamente dobra. Por quê? Eu tenho uma pessoa que é aposentado que ganha R$2.000 por mês e tenho uma pessoa que é aposentado que ganha R$40.000 por mês. Por que a faixa de isenção de imposto de renda, ao completar 65 anos de idade, se você tem renda de pensão ou aposentadoria, dobra? O governo deixa de arrecadar com isso 10 bilhões de reais por ano. Faz sentido? Nenhum. Outro exemplo de outra anomalia. No Brasil, a gente tem um sistema único de saúde que é universal, está aberto para todo mundo tem direito, é integral, cobre qualquer tipo de procedimento e gratuito. Num país que tem um sistema único de saúde, integral e gratuito, por que alguém que tem plano de saúde privado pode descontar integralmente seu gasto privado com saúde da sua renda tributável? O Brasil perde 20 bilhões de reais de arrecadação com essa possibilidade de pessoas de classe média e renda alta descontarem integralmente o gasto com saúde privado da sua renda tributável. Isso faz sentido? Num país que tem sistema universal de saúde, eu acho que não. É esse tipo de discussão, se a gente não quiser aumentar a carga tributária, que é um risco, é esse tipo de discussão que a gente vai ter que, de fato, olhar. A gente vai ter que abrir todos esses regimes especiais de tributação e colocar...
And special regimes and see this, because we need to make a fiscal adjustment. And in the country, we're in a country that is very unequal, and it is natural for the society to require from the government more distributive policies, but we need to see both sides. We need to improve the collection, changing the collection mix. We will need to increase collection. We will not be, and we need to change the composition of expenditures. Was said, Brazil spends a lot if we compare what we spend with public education, public health, and social security. And when social assistance, we spend something like 25% of the GDP. This is typical of a rich country. The problem is that the distributive effect of this social expenditure is very low. So it is basically half or less than half and then that of a country in Europe. So our challenge is to conciliate the fiscal adjustments and distributive policies. So we need to change the composition of the expenditure without increasing the expenditure, because in order to make this adjustment, Brazil will need to control the growth of expenditures, respect the ceiling of expenditure, and at the same time, we need to collect at least something like 200 billion real. Last year, we lost with the crisis 80 billion real, but we need to recover a collection besides what we lost last year. That is basically the challenge. And if you ask me what is wrong or right, there is not wrong or right in fiscal adjustment. This is political debate. The fiscal adjustment is a political debate, but we have studies that show the course, and we know clearly that to increase the expenditure, given that we have so much inefficiency, is not correct, because now in observation, the roof of ceiling and the so we need to, the pandemic was something that was not, we were not able to foresee. So nobody expected that to have between 3,000 to 4,000 people dying every day. No one expected this second wave in such a way and this aggressive strand. But that said, if the increase this intent, the expenditure in health, 10, 20, 30, 40 million, we can do this. We can open what we call extraordinary credit and spend more in health. What the seating does not allow us to start an investment to build a bridge, for example, or a nuclear submarine, or some other investment project, which has nothing to do with COVID. So it has nothing to do with the pandemic. It is something that you can plan, and but it takes long. So we need to make this clear. But basically, this is a challenge. We need to look at the expenditure. We don't want to increase, and we need to change what we call the special regime of taxation. So, and the society many times, it even ignores that it exists. So Mansueto mentioned something, your era as expertise, the dispute between the distribution needs and what the poor results. So I ask, where do you think the policy of where should we start?
Eu acho que
Monica, I think, as was said before here, the problem with Brazil is not spending. If you take a look at the 20% poorest ones in Brazil, they work all year long, and the income of those 20% which are poorest, considering the 50 million poorest Brazilians, their total income is 1/10 of the social expenditure in Brazil. Those were among the 28% poorest. They say, well, I won't manage to guarantee the social rights of my family because I'm poor, but I live in Brazil. Brazil spends 10 times what I make with this social policy. So the problem of Brazil actually is not a social expenditure. The problem of Brazil is not tax collection. The problem of Brazil is how, like Helena said, it is a matter of project. So I would even find interesting for us to have a scarcity of resources There are many projects and relatively poor resources, but which means I have a lot of projects. But I think the big problem in Brazil and is that the ceiling of expenditures is a way of indexation as well. It is a way to protect yourself in one way or another, protect yourself from spending wrongly. But what I need is not to have a ceiling like of expenditures or not. What I would like to have would be a project. I need to have a project on how I will use these resources to improve people's lives, and a government that is not in contact with the poor population, it will never manage to build a decent social policy. Any social policy needs to have capillarity, be decentralized. You need to be in contact with those who are poor, know who is poor, know what the poor need. So a channel of communication, so you can take him what they need. So we then will be capable to solve our problem. So what is the fiscal policy? More than anything else, we need to simplify our fiscal policy, because our fiscal policy is absurdly correct. Economy will not grow, and then we will not solve any problem of inequality or poverty. So above all, we need to simplify our tax issues. But the second thing is that of horizontal equity is not, so the problem in Brazil is that the rich pay too much, and it is that people with the same income pay differently depending on where their income comes. So it is lack of horizontal equity. So if you have an income, you will pay the same rate regardless of the origin. And then the third thing, after you solve this fiscal complexity, after you solve the problem of people with the same income paying the same tax, as you mentioned, the ones who are retired, for example. So I think that after we solve this problem of the complexity, then we'll have growth. The moment we end the horizontal inequity, we'll have a reasonably just, fair society. Then we will address the vertical inequality in making the rich pay a little more and the poor pay a little less. And that is important. I think both Helena and Flavia, as Monsueto, have already mentioned this before, that we have the intergeneration inequality. We spend too much with the elderly and very little with youngest. The public social investment expenditure does not go to the children, it goes to the elderly population. So we are lacking a project, we are lacking leadership, as Helena said, and that is essential. The rest will solve in one way or another. But without a project, we won't have any return. So the term reform was somehow wasted.
And at the end, the reforms are not able to have this adjustment, this moral adjustment, social adjustment that we need.
With this adjustment,
we have to know how to improve these columns of expenses and incomes and don't solve this problem. Elena always said you talk about adjustment by the column of the revenues. Do you think there is a taxation that is quite huge and we should start with this, right? Surely what these examples, these anecdotes that we have of lack of justice, I would like to give a simple example. I was sometimes to be afraid and I was ashamed, let's say, of having income tax deduction. And I was fined because of this, because I had a discount in my income tax. It seemed I was protecting some kind of physician. She's talking about the regime for the income tax here in Brazil. So you have these kind of a great number of examples, as PB has mentioned, and we have judicialization, you have issues of exemption of taxation. We have the famous free zone of Manaus. No one wants to touch this because it's a despair. If you touch one thing, you create other groups of interest. The idea would be to have a taxation reform that would simplify everything at once in order not to have exactly this discussion here or there of each group of powerful groups of interest. With a horizontal inequity, as PB has mentioned, they don't have a voice, so they remain outside. This is very good. Arminius gives this list. 2% of the GDP, changes in the income tax. My fear is we thought about taxation reform, but lack of leadership and project. We never had in Brazil such a good environment for a taxation reform as we used to have in 2019. We have the CPMF tax, and we don't talk about any other kind of decrease in the income tax. So there's kind of lack of patience with people that started talking about 1% of the richest people to tax the great fortunes. Symbolically, it's something important, but you cannot collect why you don't solve the problem of the income tax. You continue insisting, but at the end, you have exactly this, which is a project. We talk about reforms, but we end doing things in another way. Even the PACs that are being approved, I already gave up to understand fiscal rules, PB. I'm always requesting for Mansueto. No, they're going to cut the amendment of rapporteur, and I send another project at the end. What is happening with the fiscal issue in Brazil? We're going into a very weak area. If the deficit is being respected or not, you should really open your door and increase the expectation, increase the interest rate. But you very clearly, you cannot sustain, not even the Supreme Court respects the fiscal laws. They're always interpreting. No one respects the law of fiscal responsibility. You have a law that was praised as the best fiscal reform of the last 20 years, and at the end, you see everything is opposite. We are totally drifting away. So once again, I don't want to insist. I think it's an excess of reforms, but the reforms that are not taken up to the end. And also the problem of communication. When we started the reform of the Social Security, when Mansueto was part of that movement, the reform started to have a momentum when you started to talk about the social benefits of the reform, equality, not something totally fiscal. Look, society, the state distributes in a very unequal way all the public resources that we collect. That's something different that is not clear. Okay, the state is they're responsible for the inequality of society. Well, the reform of the Social Security started to advance. And you have a government nowadays that everything is, no, then you have to explain why you have to have a management reform, improve the public services. increase social expenses for public investment that reaching a limit that is impossible to sustain. So we lack this kind of communication, this skill that is necessary, and we're requesting all the time. Insisting. PB worked in a government that has strong communication, Mansueto, and many of them, and I worked in one that was very clear in their projects. So if you have a lot of reforms, you are even not giving any importance to what is approved. So all of a sudden you will find things that are not worthwhile at all. I remember one day, Flavia, I don't know if you were in the program, but in Pauta program on TV, we were discussing about the emergency benefits. And Guga Chakra, journalist who lives in New York, he said, Monica, can you tell me why to pay an emergency benefit you have to reform the Constitution? In fact, such a crazy country, you have to change the Constitution in order to pay the emergency benefit. But I would like to go back to what PB has mentioned about to help the poor people and what Flavia said about the budgets for states and municipalities that at the end execute the policies, schools and housing and social security. I would like to ask you, Flavia, you define yourself as an activist. Can you detect where do we have this great flaw? Why is the authority, why do they disconsider what happens in the poor places, the deep requirements that poverty has, and if they know the rights that they have? Look, I think we have problems even in our own territory of media that considers the central government a lot. The central government is overrepresented in all the debates, the economical debate, about social policies, about investment, about infrastructure. So when we look at Brasilia, you look a lot to Brazil. I think the population also has a strong link, this understanding that, oh, there is an entity in Brasilia that decides and that everybody is better off or worse off. That's very important for Brazilian society to understand this. And we have very little correlation with social participation and demand. So there is learning and there's lacking. We have some examples in the Amazon, for example, considering the tragedy that we're going through. We've seen actions and dialogues and intents of local civil societies, of building foundations, dialogues with great municipalities of the Amazon and Pará, or with state governments with good results. So I think that mainly in this government, that is so necessary to build these shortcuts of dialogue, direct dialogue with the subnational representatives, like the city halls or the state governors. So we see the taxation reform, we see that we have a great participation of the federal government. It's very difficult to have this kind of reform and the redesign without clearness and a political weight of the federal government. So we cannot leave aside the existence of this great entity that is the federal government. Oh, the Planalto Palace and the federal government and everything that he represents. So I would like to agree with all of you, all of us, regarding this debate about the absence of projects, but I would like to add another point of view, another element in this debate. That is exactly, in general, the debate, fiscal debate and budget debate I will repeat, very guided in this meeting of expenses and revenues. Okay, that's correct. If you don't spend, or if you spend up to the limit that is allowed, but nothing happens with whom doesn't know how to spend. Apart from all the taxation debates that is absolutely valuable, the privileged groups that are represented, and we have a debate, I think Elena mentioned this, about the taxation on great fortunes and the contribution the rich group or the population could give. But we were debating last week, not this, but the private vaccine that is being also used. The debate is not so generous for the country where we are, and an average revenue country. And I think PB will agree, this is a country of average revenue with a lot of poverty, with a lot of needs, and now more, even more because of the pandemic. So we have some debates, fiscal debates that are so bad, mainly this vaccine or the census. It's impossible to know who are the poor people, where they are, what they need, and what's their requirements, without having a diagnosis that is reliable of Brazilian society. But it seems that we need to advance. And so now this is the idea and the provocation I would like to launch, that in a commitment with social targets that I think is totally related to the efficiency. So we could last year spend 293 billions of reais with emergency funding. That is a bad design program. It was badly designed, it was badly applied, it was badly distributed. It was very bad, and above all, with the union account to court, is suspicion that 54 billions of what was spent were destined to illicit payments to people that were not allowed to receive this emergency benefit. So you were talking about one phase. This would have been a very good program. It wasn't, because in the year of 2021, this one, we have 44 billions of reais to transform in emergency benefit. That is less than what was considered the regular payment last year. And nothing happens. Nothing happens. That's it. And no one cares about it. So the government was capable to pay during 5 months, 600 reais to each family. MPB, please deny if I'm mistaken. During 5 months, 600 reais, 3 months, 300 reais, 3 months, nothing. And now 4 months, 250 reais with an emergency benefit. A mother without a husband with one son earned 1,200, 600, now 375. But the same mother, if she had 3 children, earned the same amount as emergency benefit. This is not a good social program. This is not an expense that is balanced and is guided to the requirements of the country. However, we discussed that emergency benefit was something good. It was. PB, it was like launching money from a helicopter, because some rich people even got these 600 militaries and public servants also. And no one is punished because they don't spend correctly the public money. And Brazil, I will end saying Brazil is capable of charging targets, demanding targets, and complying. We do this since 1999 with the targets of inflation. If you don't comply with it, you have to write a letter to say why. And this doesn't have with poverty, with hunger, with education, with nothing at all. I'm sorry, I was very excited. Well, that's a way to demand our rights. These expenses is exactly what's going to impact the debt or the deficit, or the adjustment has to be done. But I think these comments are very, very important to see is exasperating incorrect expense. So I pass the floor to PB, because evidently this is one of the great concerns the assessment of these policies and the way they are designed and applied. Well, I think Flavia, I have to agree entirely with her. I prefer a government that it spends, but spends each cent very well, than a government that in fact doesn't spend at all or spends very little, and the little that they spend it very badly. So the year of education, they have a lot of targets, but they don't comply with anyone. Nothing happens because they don't comply anything at all. With the inflation, this doesn't happen. And social here, the social targets are simply not ignored. They're not compliant, and that's it. No one cares about it. So we have to, I think the great issue is exactly each real that we will spend, we would have to render account and see which is the effectiveness of this spends. I think the account court was very generous with this emergency benefit. I think 200 billion were not so well spent as they should have been, because many people earned this in an illicit way. This program, when it started, I think it started very well. It started very well, but they should learn with itself. It was, they were correct, and the first month, they didn't know how to continue. By the second month, you start learning. They should have continued trying to be correct. So it was a program that was unable to think with itself. This made us to spend in some months 10 years of Bolsa Família that we spent in some months with mediocre impacts regarding poverty in Brazil. Monica, can I give? I was going to ask you a question. The law of social responsibility, does it contemplate this target, social target? I wanted to give this comment because the emergency benefit, we know it was something like the name said, it was emergency, and it could have been improved during time. And people and the academia and experts in the area could start discussing alternatives very early. It wasn't because of lack of proposals that we could have had something better. It includes, besides the census, we use very little this opportunity to increase the registry of the people. We have to know who is poor. We have to improve the one registry of all the poor people. But economists work a lot with incentives. You have targets to be reached, and you have incentives that are adequate to be complied with. I think in the social area, we have examples of this in the experience that started in Ceará regarding education. So this balance between incentives and targets is very important. So I think it's very good. And the social responsibility, what was incorporated, Tasso Gereissati, Senator, these incentives for school evasion and it stimulates the student to end their cycles, and they have insurance for them, and you have departures and arrivals in the assistance program when you try to cover volatility that we didn't understand in the emergency benefits, the difference between formal and informal market and volatility of income and revenues. It's very complicated in this government, and now it's fashionable to call the government this and this unhuman and so on. But the government always was not. It doesn't have a soul. People used to say liberalism was a single thing regarding economy, forgetting all the issue of social mobility, poverty, and inequality. Everything was left aside. So I think this is symptomatic of the lack of efficiency, the monopoly in the Caixa Econômica and distribution of an emergency benefit. So we see all those queues and everything. Everybody thinks it's normal. So that's what BB said. And no money. It's not even money. It's money that doesn't even exist. Only after 30 days you can withdraw the money. So here we are in a seminar. You want the poor people to have an iPhone, a smartphone, to have an app for them. They're obliged to have an account in the Caixa Econômica to have a right to the emergency benefit. So these are things or projects that are unacceptable. I will insist, PB has insisted, we have to know the poor people, know what they need, and deliver to them and have mechanisms of being able to do this. I think PB is one of the creators of Bolsa Família, is how to leave Bolsa Família. This idea of no one wants to leave Bolsa Família, that's not true. People want to improve targets and incentives for social issue. I like the idea of incentives. So I think the law of responsibility and all the projects that PV and Mansueto are developing. Mansueto and the famous plans, they were full of incentives. We had targets. So if not, you won't.
So
I asked Mansueto if there was any incentive for
if there is an incentive for the money to be well spent. Yes, but the treasurer only releases for each ministry. We have several rules, which I think end up complicating the efficiency of the expenditure. There are rules in areas we consider as essential, but which are related to election. Even though there are problems, I've already heard from several secretaries from states because that they feel afraid of have an increase of collection, but at the end of the year they say, well, the problem is that I need to spend with health and education and I can't manage. So I spend it with anything and then I put in the sheet that it is education and health. One of the best states in Brazil, a governor I admire very much, which is Paulo Atum, former governor of Espírito Santo a few years ago, the only state in Brazil that had grade A from the treasurer, a grade of lowest risk was the state of Espírito Santo. Paulo Atum, when he was the governor, he went to justice to include the payment of the retired ones in that it should be included in a constitutional minimum. The only state in Brazil that had grade A, the government went to justice to have this right. So we need to discuss these things very much. The efficiency of expenditure is very important, and we're in a country which is very unequal, a country where you have a natural demand for distributive policies, and it is a country that from 2008 to 2016, the budget in real terms of the Ministry of Education grew 94%, repeating. From 2008 to 2016, the budget of the Ministry of Education grew in real terms 94%. So this is a big growth. So what happened then? Why didn't we see this improve the education actually? Because the most of this growth, well, a fair amount, went to open new universities, higher education, or federal technology institutions, which are kind of small universities. So we made an expansion with this expenditure with education. We didn't have the benefit we expected. So the point about expenditures is that Brazil spends a lot. We will spend this year without the interest something like 1,600 billion real, 1,600 billion real of investment. Investment will be something like 40, 50 billion. So we have much to improve. The challenge is not to increase expenditures. That challenge is to change the composition of this expenditure, remove it from programs that don't work and put it in programs that work. But it seems to be easy, but it is not. We not have in Brazil the culture of evaluating public policies. It is something that grew very much in the past 10 years, relatively new, and we need to improve a lot because in the past 4 years it was in the government in order to change several policies, having evaluations that didn't work, it was hard. So we need to do a little of what we're saying. We need to have evaluation. We need to make this, translate these evaluations into a clear language and pressurize the politicians. Fiscal adjustments, expenditure improvement, all that involves political debate. There is no big enlightened one in society that have the solution to our problems. In order to solve our problem, we need to improve the political debate. We are otherwise we need to have a good political debate. Otherwise, we will keep on with the same problems. So we keep on with this debate. Everything you said has an aspect of final remark. We have another 2.5 minutes, so I'll give 1 minute for Helena, Flavia, and so for your final remarks. When we discuss fiscal reform and public policies. So would you like to come first? Well, I was going to say, I don't need even a minute. I think it's so hard. I only want to think about the future, and think about the future is to think about children, childhood, and to improve the intergenerational expenditure. If Brazil has to discuss one project, that is the project, and that is the social reform, which is dear to my heart. Well, I'd like to thank for the opportunity to be here with all of you, and like to say that the problem of Brazil is that of the conduction of the social policy is so, and we spend like $1.5 trillion in the social area. We spend well, but we are coming to a situation where the problem is that of evaluating. Our problem in Brazil is the first of all we do, and then we evaluate to know if that we do evaluate after doing it to know if it made sense or not. If it is as if I first built the bridge to only then discuss if the bridge should have been built or not. So the point in Brazil is that we need to learn that before we spend, I spend in a project with a good chance, a good justification for it to be successful. So I need to have a project, a well-evaluated project in order to spend, and then I'll see if I was really right, if that money was well spent. And in Brazil, we spend first, and in order to only then see if it worked or not. And I think that if we use for the emergency help, the same logic as that of the vaccine. What do we do with that vaccine? We have shares of vaccine quotas, but those who choose who has to be vaccinated in what order, then that is done locally. So if we had the emergency help with local shared quotas, and then the local governments would discover who should be benefit, then we would have a better program that would help respond far better to the situation. So the social policy requires federal resources, but it has to be implemented in a local manner and with the participation of society. Thank you. So it needs to be close to the ones who will be benefited. So Flavia, I agree with BB regarding this, and remember what Elena said about, for example, the monopoly of the Caixa Econômica, the model that was chosen, which was not that of the alliance with states and municipalities in the payment, the system of social assistance, the local ones were totally ignored in this case. I think that we're going through the climax of incompetence in public management in every area. And Elena mentioned lack of leadership and low quality of debate. So it is a hard moment for reconstructing this debate. And as Mansueto mentioned, improving the political debate, I'd like to remember that this political debate also depends intensely on representativity, and the representativity in our politics is low, and the people who need most to be in this debate are not well represented in the Congress, and it is not by chance the structure of privilege and of concessions and of benefits of special regimes that are built. They say much about social and racial inequality in Brazil. And if we manage to transform this structure and even transform politics, it is possible that the quality of the debate might improve. I hope so. And our political environment, the structure of public policy does not encompass, and Elena mentioned children. Who are the Brazilian children who need to have their future well planned with more opportunities being offered? Essentially, Black children. It is the Black and poor children who are below the line of poverty. It is the Black children from single moms who are under the line of poverty, who are in the public education, on who depend on public health. And I think that it is important for us to consider in these dimensions of inequality and balance of budget, and this element of a structural element of the Brazilian society, which is racism and machism. And so those elements have to be included in this debate on budget, public policies, and political representativeness. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was really great to be with you. I'm very proud and for having been part of this panel. It was really a privilege for me as well. It was very stimulating, interesting. And I thank the organizers of Brazil Conference as well. Ricardo Paes, Flávia, Helena Landau, Flávia Oliveira, great contribution. Brazil will need to recover the debate that did not find room. So we need to bring everyone to debate. Otherwise, I don't think we'll have any progress in the middle term. Thank you very much, and good evening, good night to you all. I hope you had enjoyed our conversation.
that goes until Saturday. I would like to tell a QR code here to access the site of Brazil Conference, the site at www.brazilconference.org, and you will be able to see all the agendas that happened the last days and what will happen. That is our closure in 2021. And before João Ferraz, that is co-president of Brazil Conference. Hi, João, how are you? Hector, yes, how are you? Good evening. Okay. Monday, when we launched Brazil Conference 2021 in Rio de Janeiro, you can also we have to adapt ourselves entirely. Normally, the conference happens in the United States, it's more focused presentially. Even if we broadcast it, we have very smaller numbers. And having a virtual conference, we reach a greater number of people. And in fact, it was very expressive number that we're able to have. So we're very happy with this conference up to now. Well, okay, we'll give a spoiler of tomorrow because after all, Brazil Conference will continue until Saturday. I'll ask the team to put the agenda here for us to follow it. Tomorrow will be also shorter than the last days. Tomorrow we will talk about the future of education at 6 p.m. So Brazil Conference in its 6th day will start at 6 p.m. Giving a spoiler now, we have Renan Ferreirinha, the Municipal Secretary of Education Rio de Janeiro, and then we will have music and social movements at 7:15 p.m. 7:15 p.m. we will have with the mediation Gigi Wagner, who is a very nice person to mediate. We have a very interesting panel with a relevant subject for the debate in Brazil. And to end the day, I am in love with this subject. social entrepreneurship at 8:30 p.m. with Luisa Eliana Trajano, that is the president of the Council of Magazine Luiza, and the group of women of Brazil that's very interested. Tomorrow we start at 6 p.m., 8:30 p.m. is the last one that will go up to 9:30 p.m. And we will have our closure and the 5th day of Brazil Conference 2021. We're starting, today is half of Brazil Conference. Tomorrow we start going to the end, and I already anticipate, already feeling saudade. Good to hear you and remain well, everybody that is watching us. Thank you for being with us up to now. Thank you all.
Muda
bye
tudo.
bye.
Muda o todo, muda o mundo. Impulso e seu negócio já não está mais no mesmo lugar. E aqui, todo mundo, startup e grande corporação, vai concordar. O cenário de inovação é um cenário de incerteza. E faz sentido que seja assim. Se é inovação, é porque ainda não foi feito. Na FabStart, acreditamos no futuro em que corporações aqui no Brasil se tornarão benchmarks de inovação para o mundo. E a FabStart, protagonista dessa transformação. Já deu para imaginar o que isso pode fazer por você? FabStart. Desafio aceito. Comece agora.